Yes guys, welcome back to another video here on the Andy#1 channel. It's Tuesday, which means another episode of Tuesday Talks, and today's guest is Richard Lee. Now Richard had a 15-year career as a professional footballer. He played for Watford and then went on to Brentford. 198 career appearances in total, as well as representing England at under 18 and under 20 level. He played for Watford, played for Brentford, played in the Premier League, Championship and League One, promotions and relegations in there, ups and downs, countless injuries. You may know him now from being a pundit. He's on Sky Sports, he's on BBC, he's on Talk Sport. He's also got several businesses, GK Icon, Goalkeepers Union. He's also written 2 books. He's done a lot of things. So let's get into the chat and let's see what Richard's got to say. As much as I would absolutely love to pick your brains about current goalkeeping, I listen to a lot of the stuff that you do on your channel and other bits, so that's my insight into you and your thoughts currently, because today we're actually here to talk about you and your career. So we'll segue straight into that, and we're going to be here for the next half an hour or so to then talk about your ups, your downs, and everywhere along the way. So for you to give some insights then into the younger goalkeepers who tend to join in on my channel as well. So anyone who has joined now, just to give a quick, a brief little intro to you, you joined Watford Academy at the age of 11. You then you went through the age groups and had almost a 15-year professional career. 198 career appearances, Watford, Brentford, promotions, relegations, Premier League, Championship, League One, England as well in there at under 18 and under 20 level. All sorts of things going on within your career that I'm sure you can give some really detailed insights into. Lots of injuries as well, as reading up against. And now since retirement, you're a very successful businessman. I mean, people might have seen you on Sky Sports, Gillette Saturday, BBC, Talk Sport, listen to you, but you've also got numerous businesses as well, GK Icon, Goalkeepers Union. You seem to have a lot of things currently keeping you busy away from football.
Yeah, I'm quite lucky. I've got is goalkeeping based. So I've really tried to make a point of just honing in on goalkeeping and the various facets of goalkeeping. So working with a lot of the top level professionals, where able to offer, I say support, more of a sounding board really. So I studied a lot of psychology. I wrote a book on goalkeeping psychology. So to be able to offer them that support, that's been a big focus of mine. But I think there's so much more in the world of goalkeeping. So we do have goalkeeping schools for the kids, and we do a lot of the podcasts. You mentioned Goalkeepers Union. We've got a lot of podcasts we put out. We do a lot of roundups from the week, but almost as a bit of an educational platform. So where I feel the goalkeepers sometimes get a bit of a rough ride because people don't fully understand the position, certainly outfield players, because it is effectively a different sport within the sport. So it's just trying to offer something that's reasonably entertaining and educational and insightful. And thankfully we get pretty good feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I tune in as much as possible. I'm lucky enough to work from home throughout this whole period all the time. So 4 o'clock on the days you do your little insights and whatnot, to try and get in there as long as I don't have meetings myself as well. So thoroughly encourage everyone else to do exactly the same. Just to hear your insights, because I find, I mean, you mentioned the point about the media there and the kind of lack of goalkeeping representation. It's definitely something that I think needs to be looked at in the future. Strikers seem to be taking all of the media time, and goalkeepers seem to get very little at the moment.
Yeah, that's pretty much spot on. I think and what you've seen, like where they've got, for instance, the referees, they might have a referee on site in order to give his thoughts or her thoughts on what's going on, certain decisions. I am surprised they don't actually have that for goalkeeping. I know it sounds a bit, goalkeepers obviously it's very different to a referee, and that goalkeeper's part of the team. But yeah, I do find it odd. I mean, I've touched on this a lot myself, that you've got the likes of a Gary Neville. Gary Neville, fantastic when it comes to his analysis of outfield players, but it's going to be tough to analyse something that you haven't done. And goalkeeping, it's a completely different position. The intricate details, a lot of the mistakes or the great saves we've seen, even in the last week, the comments that have been made on them, more often than not, just aren't accurate because people don't know. People haven't been there. It is something, if it was a school subject, whereas I would count myself as someone who's an A or an A star when it comes to goalkeeping, someone who hasn't played the position, they're never going to be above a C. So it's going to be real basic info, and quite often the info is wrong. Yeah,
100% agree with that. Right, going back to you, we're actually going to open up with a question that's come in from one of the followers, at JJ_Lenny. It asks, how did it all start? When did you start playing?
I guess I've probably a similar story to many, in that I started off outfield, and it was the case of we didn't have a goalkeeper one game. I went in goal, and the rest is history to an extent. Where I was quite lucky was there was a local centre of excellence in Aylesbury, where I grew up. So at the age of 10, 11, We actually had a game. The Watford scout came and watched the game. We won the game 10-0. I didn't touch the ball, but thankfully my manager said to the scout, "You really should have a look at this goalkeeper." So I went for a trial, and thankfully I got in. And then it was just year after year. Got a lot of luck along the way, because I think, even my very first trial, and this will be of interest to a lot of young goalkeepers, what they did, very first trial, had my training session, did reasonably well. The coach pulled me over at the end. His first question to me was, "How tall's your dad? How tall's your mum?" And thankfully, my dad's 6'5". So instantly, that was a big yes. And now I never got above 6 foot. But the fact that my dad was 6'5", that was a big reason as to why they signed me as an 11-year-old. And as I mentioned, thankfully, I was able to sort of stick in there. And it was when I got to about 16, it started to kick on a bit, and I got some England recognition. And I think at that age, I realised that I was quite good, I guess. But before then, it never really felt that serious. But as soon as I got to 16, left school, joined Watford full time, then it really kicked on.
So when you started playing outfield, what position were you playing then before you were playing in goal?
Yeah, I was a left winger, a lazy left winger. And I was okay. I always played a year up. I think that helped. And certainly now you see the likes of a Dean Henderson, who was very much an outfield player when he was younger. If anything, a lot of the top goalkeepers now did play outfield when they were younger because of the position now, the nature of the position. I think to be good with both feet, to have that kind of distribution, to be really comfortable, to be able to step into that sweeper role, sometimes even into defence and play like the likes of Edison Allison does. I think it does help if a young goalkeeper can play outfield for a period of time.
Edison, like as you mentioned, he was a left back and also played a lot of futsal at that. So although now it's very much in the game in terms of goalkeeper possession, playing out the back, it might not have been relatively the same sort of situation that you were in at your time. So do you think it helped, though, you playing in outfield before then you playing in goal?
I think it did. I think that where it was different, I'm showing my age now, it was only when I was 12 or 13, the back pass rule came in. So it did help, but I think I still remember as a 10-year-old playing in goal, passing it to a centre-back, the centre-back passing it back so I could pick it up and punt it. So I think it was very different. It was only really when I was 15, 16, I started to focus on distribution. So look, if I had my time again, and like a lot of the young goalkeepers now, if you can work on your left and right foot at a really early age, if you can work on your side volley at a really early age, they're tools now that you need if you're going to make it to the Premier League or make it in as a professional footballer. There's certain things you absolutely have to have as a goalkeeper. I'd be interested, if I came through now, I'd have to be a very different goalkeeper to make it in today's game. I don't think the game that I had, as good as I was and as well as I did in my career, I don't think I'd have made it as a professional now, let alone make it to the Premier League. I think the goalkeeping has changed that much over the last few years.
I mean, those sort of age, who were the goalkeepers then that you idolised when you were growing up?
So for me, Peter Schmeichel, because I was a Man United fan, first and foremost. Him, I soon realised I wasn't going to be a Peter Schmeichel figure, 6'5", an absolute monster of a man, and the way in which he played, I wasn't necessarily going to be that. So the people that I gravitated towards loved Iker Casillas, still do. Iker Casillas is a big favourite. Richard Wright, when I was very young. When he was young and he was at Ipswich, he was really kicking on in a big way. And I thought he'd go on and play for England many times. Obviously did play for England, but not that many times. Other than that, no, Iker Casillas was a big one. And then obviously now, the ones that I look at in a big way now, Edison and Allison goes without saying. I think they're in their own league. It has to be said. They're superb. And then I think you've got a band that are just below that. They're real top goalkeepers. And thankfully, for the first time in a long time, we've got a lot of English goalkeepers playing in the Premier League, which is quite nice too.
Yeah, I mean, your love of Ben Foster often comes out as well in some of your chats. Now, he's not actually that much. Well, actually, you're about a year older than him, I think.
Yeah.
So surely, in terms of now the back end of your career, do you still think that you could play?
I have days where I think I could, and then I get out of bed and then my left knee plays up and I realise I can't. But no, do you know what? I do. I mention his name way too often, and my co-host on the podcast always gives me a lot of stick because I always seem to drop his name into it. But I think it's because I learned, even though we are the same age, you mentioned, I think it's 6 months difference. So there's so much I learned from him, though. Just the way he holds himself, his body language when he plays, his enjoyment for playing games of football, his mentality, and of course he's got all the natural attributes. He's so powerful, works hard on his game. I've just got a lot of time for him, and I just think it's an interesting one with Ben because I do think that he's had an incredible career, but you do wonder whether the time at Man United, if it had been a year or two later, whether he could have really secured that. Because I look at it now, he's playing as well as he's ever played. If you were to compare him like for like with a lot of the other goalkeepers in the Premier League, he's still top 6 for me, if not top 4. He is so good, and I did have the fortune of working with him for a couple of years. Similarly, Brad Friedel was another one I worked with, and I learned so much. Two really consistent goalkeepers, very different goalkeepers, massively different goalkeepers, but again, two top-class goalkeepers that I was fortunate enough to work with, see at close quarters and understand exactly why they made it to where they did.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to those early years still, in terms of your influences from there, who are really key influences when you've grown up being involved in goalkeeping and the professional, or even just trialling in those sort of times in there? Who are the key influences for you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think like a lot of people, parents play a big role, and certainly my mum and dad, you know, were huge for me. Mum took me to training, which was a 3-hour round trip. She did that 3 times a week. Dad watched every game I've ever played. So that was huge. I had the support there, which I think, you know, I was very, very lucky for that. Then I think there's the motivation, like having the mindset of, I talk a lot in psychology about believe to see to believe. Like some people going to, you know, wanting to be a professional footballer is you have to believe before you see it. You have to believe you're going to make it. It might be 10 years down the line, but you have to wake up every day and think, I am going to make it there one day. And the thing is, you can't have any guarantee of it. There's no proof to show you you're going to make it. So you just have to have blind faith that you are going to make it. So I think a big thing for me is the motivation to have something that's strong enough within you that makes you keep moving forward every day, even though you don't know for definite it's going to happen. And looking back, I had a couple of reasons as to why that was, but I always had that inner fire. Like every day I wanted to find something I could improve. And I just was passionate about goalkeeping. So yeah, simple as it sounds, biggest influence was my parents. I love watching football. I love watching goalkeepers. There were certain goalkeepers I idolized. And every day it was just the mindset of how can I be as good as them? How can I find a way to improve?
Yeah, I mean, mindset is something that we'll come into because I'm really interested because you've also done NLP, haven't you? Neuro-linguistic programming. I find mindset in terms of training and coaching, but actually might as well get straight into that now. In terms of your coaching that you had as a youngster versus the coaching that you had versus the end of the game, was there any part of that which actually focused on the mindset mentality, or is that something that you just picked up along the way and you've just sort of run with?
Yeah, I think initially I got lucky. I think I got lucky because I had a couple of things that drove me, and they weren't necessarily, there's not a good or bad motivation necessarily, but I was very motivated as a kid, certainly. I was lucky that I met someone at Watford called Keith Mincher, and some people will be aware of him, top mindset coach. I still speak to him even today because I'm fascinated by the subject, and he really taught me a lot, led me down some roads that really allowed me to broaden my mind and understand how, look, we've all been there. You can turn up one game and be so confident. You can turn up the next game and be really nervous. Now, why is that? It's not some magical power. It's just the way in which you're processing thoughts. So then just understanding how I can process my thoughts differently to feel a different way. Now, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to play a good game of football. But what it does, if you get your head right and you get your thoughts right, and more often than not, you're positive in your thinking, you can then enter games really excited, passionate, full of energy, which of course will give you a better chance of playing a good game of football. So a lot of it was quite simple, but I didn't learn it until I was in my 20s. And I wish I'd have learned that at a younger age. Because I think for a lot of goalkeepers now, that's the bedrock. Get the mind right, then you can really kick on and maximise whatever potential you've got.
Yeah, you say you didn't learn that until your 20s because you were making your first team debut at 19. You've also represented England before that as well, haven't you? So how were those experiences for you?
Yeah, and you know what, there's, again, I'll try not to get too geeky with this, but they call it in psychology like a secondary gain. So sometimes what could be a negative habit can have a secondary gain. So for me, I think where I didn't believe I was that good as a youngster, but my belief in that meant that I trained harder than anyone. I made a point of, I thought, well, I don't think I'm good enough. So therefore I'm going to train harder than anyone to try and be good enough. Now, the truth was I was pretty good. I was in England squads. I was, like you say, playing for Watford at a young age. But I think because my mindset was what it was, I made sure I was the last person out on the training pitch every day. I made sure that although we started at 10 o'clock, I was doing a kicking session at 8:30 on my own at Watford every day, just because my mentality was I need to do this in order to keep up with everyone else. So that was a weird kind of negative mindset that had a real positive secondary gain. So yeah, a lot of it was, I was turning up to games and I was very nervous going into, I played for England on TV at the age of 16 at Upton Park, if I remember rightly. And I remember being terrified, coming on with 20 minutes to go and sort of 7,000 people there and being absolutely terrified. But I'd obviously worked hard enough that when the key moments happened, I guess I'd trained myself to do instinctively what I needed to do. But it wasn't by design. It wasn't one where I'm going into these games feeling fantastic. It was only later in my career that I managed to get the balance right, where I was going into games confident and I'd done the work as well. And it came together and I had a couple of really good seasons on the back of it. But yeah, a lot of it really was more luck than judgment, I'd say, when I was younger.
Well, I suppose what you're talking about there is that the mindset for training versus a mindset for a game, and the two must be slightly different to the one another. Like you say, that fire to improve versus that now I'm confident, I'm confident that I can perform. In terms of that game preparation, did that change for you then throughout your career? Is there anything that you did to make you more confident just before that game?
Yeah, I did. I mean, if anything, I went kind of full circle because I then went down the route of I found a way to feel much better before games, not feel maybe as nervous, not as fearful, but then I saw my performances dip off a bit because I think that I didn't quite have the balance right. Maybe I wasn't working quite so hard in training, and although I felt better for games, my performances weren't so good. So, look, one of the simple tools that I use that I'd always advise anybody listening in, any young goalkeeper listening in, visualization and imagery for me are just huge because I think that you can run through a game in your mind. And because the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between what's real and what isn't, what I mean by that is if you think about something in enough detail, you can make yourself excited. You can get the hairs standing on end if you think about it in enough detail. So with that being the case, you can run through games before you've even played them. You can imagine being at the particular stadium or the particular park or wherever it is you're playing and run through your techniques, run through your goal kicks, run through catching your crosses, making saves, the ball's moving on you. Go through whatever you need to go through and do it in an upbeat fashion. Get the music playing, get your state in a positive state so you're feeling good about it. And it's such a simple thing to do before a game, but you'll be amazed when you go into the game, the positive impact that can have, because it'll almost feel like you've been there before. So I'd always recommend imagery, visualization, huge for me.
And then on top of that, that's obviously before the game and getting into it, every goalkeeper's made a mistake. How do you cope with that? And what are the coping mechanisms, tools that are in that toolbox of yours that you could use? What are the key ones for you?
Again, great question, because look, this is it. Most people don't practice making a mistake. What I mean by that is when you make the mistake, it almost comes by surprise. Now, the obvious thing to say is, well, just feel confident, just carry on. But we all know it's not as simple as that. So something I recommend, again, is part of your imagery, part of your visualization, actually imagine making a mistake. Now, that's not to draw it into your game or to go out and purposefully make a mistake, but consider what your reaction is going to be. Because you'll see one keeper that will kick the post and screaming and swearing and upset and, you know, and then all of a sudden the next one comes and they make another mistake and another mistake and another mistake. Look, the truth is you're going to make mistakes in the season. The point is, can you bounce back immediately? Now, one way in which you could do that is to prepare for it. So imagine, go through it in your mind. Imagine making a mistake. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to pick yourself up. You're going to dust yourself down. Are you going to hold your hand up? What are you going to do? Like, actually consider it and have a game plan. Because next time it happens, you want to be able to move forward, finish the rest of the game well, and win the game. Now, I bring up this situation a lot and this example a lot. Those that saw the League One playoff final last year, Dylan Phillips for me was a brilliant example. Now, Dylan's someone I know personally, so I'm probably a bit biased here when I talk about this. But for me, incredible mindset in that young goalkeeper makes a huge error 5 minutes into a game. Now, a lot, that would destroy a goalkeeper. For a lot of goalkeepers, they'd want the ground to swallow them up. They'd want to get substituted. They might fake an injury. They'd do whatever they can to get themselves out of that situation. In fairness to Dylan, he kept his head, played brilliantly for the rest of the game. They end up winning the game 2-1, and it's all forgotten to an extent. And I just think that if you've got the ability to do that, what it will mean is you'll be so much more resilient. Nothing can stop you. And even though you do make mistakes, you can learn from those mistakes later, but you'll never be a liability to the team. So that's a powerful way in which you can do that. Preempt mistakes. Think about your mistakes and figure out a strategy for when you next make one.
You talk about preparation there as well. A lot of coaching chat that I've been listening to at the moment has been around not necessarily encouraging the goalkeeper to make mistakes, but putting them in situations where they will make mistakes in training and seeing how they respond from that.
Yeah.
From your experience of your 15-year career, how was the coaching changed from when you started to when you finished?
Yeah, again, great question. I see Rob's made a good comment there about having a physical action. I'll just touch on that because he said about Cav Clark's idea to unstrap and restrap a glove is a good idea. Really nice.
No, I'm a bit behind on the comments here. Cav's actually an ex-United goalkeeper, and that's exactly what he told me.
Yeah, I love that.
That's brilliant.
Because I think there's a physical action as well. It's important. Like I mentioned, my one was always that. Wipe the gloves off and you go again. Like that's almost me mentally, okay, I'm ready now. Let's do this. You know, my bad. Let's carry on. You know, but I think that's another really good example. Touching on the coaching, how's it changed? I think that the realization that rather than maybe 15, 20 years ago, you turn up for training and it might be you do 10 volleys, you do 10 pickups, you do 10 shots from distance, you then go and join in a five-a-side, then you go home. Now, you consider what your actual day's work is and your improvement, it's going to be minimal, really, because you're not stretching your comfort zones. I think a lot of the modern day goalkeeper coaches, they realize that it's a lot more than that. You need to stretch comfort zones every day. You need to make mistakes every day. Otherwise, you're not improving. So when I look back and maybe I'll catch 20 volleys to start the day, all right, there's a place for that. But if it's not in getting harder every day, then really what might end up happening is I go through the motions. So you need to keep improving things. So for me, I look at a goalkeeper and you look at them almost as sum of thousands of parts. How can I improve this goalkeeper? Can I improve their spring? If so, let's put a plyometric program in place in order to help improve them. Can they improve mentally? Okay, we can work on that. There's certain things you can do. Nutritionally, what are they eating? Are they maximizing their sleep on the back of nutrition? Are they maximizing their energy output on the back of their nutrition? Physically, are they in a good physical shape? Can we work on that slightly? And I think if you can break it down, then of course you've got the technical aspects to a goalkeeper as well. If you can break it down, then you can work with each individual part and you can put a program in place for each individual part. I think a lot of the top modern day goalkeeper coaches, if I'm going to mention some names, Andrew Sparks, a real student of the game at Southampton, Neil Cutler, I think he's excellent. Andy Quire, I've seen lots of good stuff from him. He's at Brentford now. Who have you got? Andy Marshall, Charlton, I think is fantastic. I think you've got Eric Steele, of course, is very well known, ex-Man United and does a bit of the FA. And there's so many more I can mention. But these guys, they look at goalkeeping differently. They don't look at it game to game and they love you if you play well. They don't like you if you don't play well. It's looking and considering the long-term plan and putting that plan in place.
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate to spend some time with Andrew Sparks in New York when he was there at the very start of his career. So yeah, there were flickerings of it there, but he's obviously gone on to some great things at the moment. So in terms of then goalkeeping coaching characteristics, what sort of coaching characteristics would you be looking for if you were being coached?
I think the personality that a goalkeeper coach is important, because I think the personality of a goalkeeper coach, you want to make your goalkeeper feel good. So first and foremost, they need to be quite upbeat, I would say. So you get a nice energy in the session. I think they need to work with the individual. So each goalkeeper is different. Each goalkeeper needs different work. That can be quite tough if you're coaching 4 or 5 goalkeepers at a time. But if you can work with each goalkeeper individually, then again, you can consider what their strengths are and what needs working on. And you can tailor it to the goalkeepers. And I think that then takes a certain amount of intelligence as well as knowing a host of drills and also keeping it fresh. I think it's all good and well that you might have a structure to your week where it might be a heavier stuff earlier on in the week. It might be your power work Monday, Tuesday. You might do your crossing and kicking Thursday, Friday, a bit of sharper stuff on a Friday before a game. That's all fine. But I think it's also important to change the drills just to keep testing the goalkeepers in different ways, because what happens in a game is that no 2 games are the same. Every single situation you face is different. You have to be comfortable in uncertainty. You have to be comfortable in chaos. So that's where training comes in. When you're training for a game. So as much as you can, you need to hold the goalkeepers to the highest standard. If they're making mistakes in training, it needs to be known that this will happen in a game. So look, you need to train as if you're playing a game. And I think it's very important the goalkeeper coach sets the right environment where it's fun, but it's also really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, we've segued off a little bit from you and your career. So just going back to your time at Watford, you've gone through the age groups, you've hit reserve team, you've hit first team, you've played in the Premier League now for Watford. What's the differences between all those age groups, reserve team, first teams? What are the key differences?
Yeah, and do you know what? It's as bizarre as it sounds, in some ways playing in the Premier League is easier than playing in League One. And the reason I say that is that I was fortunate enough to play, I think, 11 games in the Premier League. I played against Man United, 3 of those games. 2, but then 1 in the Cup. But I think, like, playing against them, good example. I don't remember catching a cross against them because the delivery was so good and wasn't anywhere near me. I remember that I was able to play out because they didn't pressurise and they were happy for us to have the ball. So actually, my games against them really were just picking the ball out of the net and making a few saves. Whereas you play in League One, and I remember playing a few games in particular where I've come for 12 crosses in a game and you're getting battered every time. And so I think it's very different for a goalkeeper because you're playing, again, an individual sport in this team environment and you're doing similar techniques regardless of what game you play. And more often than not, in the Premier League, the quality of the shots might be better. They might get a little bit more movement. But actually, a lot of the stuff you're doing is very similar. And if anything, when you're playing in the Premier League, the grounds are that much bigger, so you don't feel the elements as much. The crowds are that much bigger, so you can't actually hear your players or communicate that well with your players. So it does actually reduce what you have to do to an extent. But that being said, look, the quality of the players being that much better, you do concede, or I certainly conceded a lot more goals in the Premier League than I did in League One. So, Yeah, I think the other part of it is how you deal with the stage as well. Like the Premier League is the Premier League. It's, there are millions watching you on TV every game you play. So I think the mentality to be able to deal with that is hugely important. Whereas when you play in League One, yeah, there's a few thousand in the stadium and a couple more thousand might watch on TV, but it's nowhere near as big of an occasion, and you're not going to get the same critiquing in the press as you would in the Premier League.
Yeah, now that is kind of, again, to talk about mentality, but mentality in a different shape, because your time at Watford, you've gone from being first choice in the Championship to then having a season and a half as being a number two. So how did that work for you? How did you manage to cope with that?
Yeah, I think it's a different mentality. I think there are pros and cons to both, by the way. If you're playing week in, week out, of course, the danger of that is that then you don't train quite so hard, or you're just going from game to game to game. You're not actually getting that improvement in training because you're so focused on the games. Similarly, when you're a number two, arguably you can work a bit harder in the gym. You can do a bit more training. Your level of improvement might be that much more, but you're not getting the game improvement. So there are pros and cons to both. I mean, the perfect situation is that you're playing regularly and you put together a strategy and a structure where you're still training really hard and you're focused on improvement as well as playing the regular games. I mean, for me, like anyone, you look back on your career and there are times when I wish I had done certain things differently. Being a number two at times, I got a little bit too comfortable, and that can happen, that you're in a nice environment, you're enjoying training, you're enjoying your day-to-day life, but you're a number two. Maybe when I was to Ben Foster, for instance, where I knew I was a number two, and I probably accepted that a little bit too easily. And I wish I'd have had it. I advise my goalkeepers I work with now very differently on that front, because I think you need to play as often as you can. Obvious statement, but you do. You need to be playing ideally all the time. Not always possible, and sometimes you have to bide your time, but certainly you want to be in the spotlight all the time. But I thought, I was fortunate. The other thing was injuries. I had so many injuries. I look back and I wish I'd have done things differently when I was younger in terms of building my core strength and working a lot of those core attributes that you need in order to build a base to then build your strength and your power from there. I probably didn't do that when I was younger, which again, you could be playing, you get a bad injury, you soon find yourself as a number two through no fault of your own.
I mean, I've read the list of the injuries that you've had, and I've reeled them off now, but I think it might take me to the rest of this interview and whatnot. Yeah. Again, I suppose it touches on mentality again, but how do you keep yourself focused on the end goal while you're out? I mean, your worst injury, I think, was your ruptured shoulder when you were out for a period of time. I think it was 9 months or whatnot. So how do you keep yourself focused in that time in order to know that you're going to come back?
Yeah, I think goal setting is really important. I think being motivated or finding motivations. So it might be that you're focusing on a completely different part of your game. So in that situation, focusing on distribution, for instance, and setting yourself goals that excite you and reasons to want to turn up to training every day. Physical goals as well, stuff you can do in the gym. So I think it's just a complete reframe. It's just understanding that certainly when I did my shoulder, 9 months, and I knew it was going to be 9 months as soon as I woke up after the operation. I thought it was going to be 6 weeks, sorry. And then I had the operation, woke up, and the surgeon comes in and basically told me it was a lot worse than he thought. So it's going to be 9 months. So, but you have a day or two feeling sorry for yourself, but then you just have to put a plan in place. And also, look, there is more to life than football. So it's that realization as well that, okay, 9 months, I'm going to work on my distribution, my physical strength, etc., etc. Plus, I'm going to enjoy this area of life. I'm going to go to more shows, cinema, meet my friends, etc., etc. So you kind of then figure out what's going to bring you enjoyment, because time will pass. At some point, you will be there. And thankfully for me, you will be playing again. But you've got to figure out how to keep your head in the meantime. The last thing you want to do is then turn up 9 months later and then put on 3 stone and, I've had a really tough 9 months. You need to just figure out how to keep your head, work as hard as you can, and make sure that come 9 months, you are the best state you can be in and a better goalkeeper than you were when you got injured.
So now you've moved, we're going back to your career. You've gone from Watford to Brentford. Now you've had quite a rocky start at Brentford, and then you finished up being known as the penalty shootout king. I think I was reading an article.
Yeah.
So you've gone from what is essentially a bad place into a very good place in order to finish. So how did you overcome? Again, it goes back to a mentality question, doesn't it? How did you overcome those rocky first few months, being dropped from the side, to then being able to get back into it and then being able to finish on a high?
Yeah, it was a combination of everything we spoke of here, I think, in terms of mindset. So I joined Brentford, and Wojciech Szczesny, of course, the Juventus goalkeeper, ex-Arsenal, he would have been on loan the season before at Brentford. Fans loved him. I step in, my first game against Fulham in a friendly, and we lose 5-0, and I played badly. And all of a sudden, instantly, I'd already turned a lot of fans against me without even really stepping foot in the door. So it took a while, and I was fortunate in that I was given a few cup games to prove myself. But it was before that, it was just having a real drive to want to, I suppose, prove the manager wrong. That was a big drive, and to show people what I could do, to show that, you know, my success or whatever success I'd had at Watford wasn't by accident, and actually that I was a good goalkeeper. So it was a lot of affirmations, a lot of soul searching, a lot of training, a lot of just going back to knowing what worked for me and to get my game to the highest level it could be. And thankfully, then when I did get my opportunities thereafter, I took them and eventually got my starting place in the October, I think it was. And yeah, it ended up being a fantastic season. Unfortunately, I got injured, I think, in the April maybe, and I missed the back end, missed Wembley. We made the JPT final. But yeah, for me, some incredible memories. And actually, if anything, I suppose it backed up my belief in a lot of the stuff that I talk about, where if you can structure your mind in the way in which you want to structure your mind and find ways to find those positive states when you need to, you can play a lot of good games of football. And thankfully that season I was able to.
And then why did you retire?
Largely injury, I'll be honest. Like, I hadn't trained properly. And there was one game in particular that I was quite proud of the fact that I never conceded more than 4 goals in a single game. And that was to Man United on a couple of occasions. So, you know, never ever more than 4 in a couple of hundred games. And yeah, my last ever game, we actually drew the game 4-4. It went to extra time and it ended up being 6-6. And it was away at Dagenham and Redbridge. Now, no disrespect to Dagenham, but I think they were League Two at the time. You know, it wasn't the biggest game I played in, and I just didn't feel anywhere near the goalkeeper I once was. And I felt that every time I upped my training to try and get back to where I once was, I'd always break down with another injury. And at that point, I had the operation on my shoulder. I dislocated this one. I'd ruptured my bicep, broken cheek, broken eye. My knee had been reconstructed. So I wasn't able to train. So it was a catch-22. Yeah, I could sit on the bench, and I've got experience. I could probably step in every now and then and do a job. But that wasn't enough, really. And I think that I've always had an interest in business. You touched on it. And I thought the time's right. And I had one last hurrah when Fulham loaned me, which I probably shouldn't have done, given that I then alienated a lot of Brentford fans, given the hatred between the two. But no, I just knew the time was right. And I was quite excited to move on and do something different. And what I've got now is a blend of both worlds. I'm still massively involved in football. I still work with a lot of professional footballers, which was always very much the dream. I go to game after game, which I love doing. But I'm not injured. You know, that did get me down. Training and breaking down time and time again. You ask any footballer, when you're in that situation, it does get to you. So now I feel physically as fit as I've felt for years. Plus, I'm still getting a lot of the things I did enjoy from football.
Yeah, you sound a bit like the Bionic Man. When you go through the scanners at the airport, do they go off? Do you have to go around the side?
Do you know what? For a period of time, it was. And because I've got the 4 screws in here, I've got pins in there. I never had them in there in the end. They decided against it, got it in my knee. But what ends up happening, it sounds gross, your bone grows over the screws. So the first year or so, yeah, it set them off, but now it doesn't. I think there's enough bone that's kind of grown over the screws.
And you missed off your one game for Hampton and Richmond, I think it was.
No, do you know what? So I never played for them. I played for Braintree.
Oh, was it Braintree?
I've gone 2 years without putting on a pair of gloves. And long story short, I did a favour for someone. So, but actually, that was another good example where 2 years, hadn't literally touched a football in 2 years. As soon as I retired, I was done. And they needed a goalkeeper. They were desperate. I knew the guy. I was like, look, I'll step in. So I did one training session on the Thursday. Then I played on the Saturday. And that's it. That's all. And then since, I haven't put on a pair of gloves again. But the game actually went okay. It's amazing if you do that and you do enough work mentally and you really consider what it is you're about to do. I actually did okay in the game. We lost the game, but I did all right. You know, my kicking wasn't anywhere near as far as it used to be, and I wasn't quite as sharp as I was, but made several saves and actually felt quite comfortable, bearing in mind I hadn't played for 2 years.
Nice. There's hope for me yet then.
Yeah. Still
right.
tough.
Last quick fire 5 questions.
Yeah.
Who's the best goalkeeper that you've played with?
Played with, it's a toss-up between Brad Fried or Ben Foster, but I've got to go Ben. I think Ben edges it just for his pure raw power, I think.
Yeah, best goalkeeper you played against?
Van der Sar, I would say.
Good
Got
choice.
his shirt, actually. I got his shirt, I got Shay Gibbons. They're probably my 2 best shirts that I got. But yeah, Van der Sar, it's massive, his shirt. But yeah.
Best game that you've played?
That would be, for Watford, it would have been probably Man City away. Got a 0-0 draw, which was quite proud of that at the Etihad. But then for Brentford, would have been my best ever game was Everton at home. We beat them in the cup. And yeah, made a load of saves and we won on penalties. That was kind of the turning point of Brentford.
Penalty save in there as well. Not the penalty saves versus Charlton.
And that was a good one as well. The actual game had nothing to do though, but then the penalties, yeah, I made 3 in a row in the shootout. So that was a nice moment.
What's the best ever save that you've made?
Do you know what? There's been a few that I look back and think, yeah, they were good. There was one away at Charlton I made that I was pleased with. When I was younger, actually, Patrick Berger, if you remember him, I made one top left against Patrick Berger when we played Portsmouth in the Cup. I was only young, like 21 maybe, and I remember it top left, and he absolutely smashed it. I got a firm hand to it, top left, and it was the first time I wrenched my shoulder, which is the one I eventually dislocated. But I remember really happy with the save. But that was the start of my shoulder issues. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, he could strike a ball.
Oh, unbelievable! Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Best manager that you've worked under?
I've had some good ones. Do you know what? I never played for him, but Brendan Rodgers was very good. I really liked him. Man management style, I thought was very good. Malky Mackay was very good. I have to say Brendan though. Yeah. And Ray Lewington gave me my opportunity. Great guy. Really pleased that he's kicked on and done so well. But yeah, I'd have to go Brendan.
Nice. Final question then, before I let you go. You can have a training session with 3 goalkeepers, any time. They'll be in their prime for this training session. So the likes of Banks will be in his prime.
Yeah.
Choose him. Who are they and why?
Oh, that is a tough question because, I mean, you'd have to, I'm looking back. I was lucky, by the way, to work with Peter Benetti, who was my first goalie coach. Great guy. But you'd have to have a Banks in there. You'd think like a Lev Yashin. I look at today, Peter Schmeichel, of course, even a David Seaman. You look at today, Oblak, Ter Stegen, Edison, Alisson, Petr Cech would be great. I don't know if I can choose 3. I'm just giving you 9 there. Can I get a few plus ones?
Well, you're going to have 3 training sessions of the 3s, plus yourself in there as well. I'll join in as well, just to make it there as well.
Absolutely.
Right, that's our time up. So thank you very much for that chat and that insight into it. I find it fascinating. I love it's something I wish I'd read a lot more about, is about the mindset and the mentality and how that then links into coaching. I read a lot of likes of Bill Beswick, being one. Dan Abrahams on Twitter is very good, and the books that he's got, but all that sort of stuff really fascinates me. So to listen to you and how to apply it into the game and into the professional games, really fascinating. So if you just want to have the last little bit, just tell people where they can find you and all the various different links and whatever else it is you need to have a chat about now.
Absolutely. No, the easiest thing, just drop me a follow, I guess. Obviously, at Richard Lee GK is my Insta. But yeah, we've got all the podcasts and stuff. I'm sure that everyone will enjoy if they haven't listened to already. We've gone through a lot of the Premier League lads. We've got about 90 podcasts now, I think, including like Joe Hart, Asmir Begovic, Brad Friedel, Nick Pope, Tom Heaton. Loads. Most of the Premier League lads, Championship lads, so it's always worth a listen. I think it's goalkeepersunion.net is the website. Yeah,
I mean, just to touch quickly on Joe Hart, every pro that I've interviewed so far doing this who has trained or had time on loan, it's been with Joe Hart, have all mentioned Joe Hart as being the goalkeeper that they've looked up to or they've learnt the most from. Yeah. So that will be the one that I'll go in and listen to at some point. I don't when I go for a run or something later on this evening. Yeah, perfect. And look, I back that up. I mean, hopefully he just finds a platform where he can kick on again because he's still so young. And what he's done previously hasn't vanished. He is still a top goalkeeper. Just needs to find the right platform. Yeah. Right. Thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated. Thank you. Cheers, everyone. Thank you. Cheers.